Hello, I'm Will Yeoman, CEO of Writing WA, and welcome to another episode of Pod Street, Writing WA's official podcast, where today it's my great pleasure to be joined by Rachael Johns. Rachael, welcome to Pod Street.
Thank you for having me. I'm stoked to be here.
And as always, you're looking pretty in pink there, colour coordinated.
It's a very hot day when we're doing this, isn't it? So I'm in a very loose
Now, we're here to talk about your latest book, The Bad Bridesmaid, which is it's a great title and a great cover as well. And to kick us off, perhaps tell us a little bit more about you and about your previous books as well, like in a nutshell.
Yeah. Well, basically, I know I'm putting the pressures on. I have been writing I started writing when I was 17 and it took me 15 years to get published. So it's been a long journey. But I've been published now since 2012, I think. Okay. So, I've been writing basically over half my life, but it took a while to sort of find my niche, and I found that, in rural romance after trying lots and lots of different kinds of fiction. There's a lot of luck in publishing, and I had the right book at the right time finally.
Yes, of course.
So then I wrote for a number of years just rural romance, which is kind of tongue twister but self-explanatory. And then I had an idea kind of that wasn't a straight rural romance. I realized that it was a family story, and I'd always loved reading more. Like, my first love in fiction is relationship fiction, like, family dramas, sagas, all that kind of stuff. People like, Monica McInerney and Marion Keyes.
Oh, yes.
So that's the idea kind of that shot me into another genre. So then since then I've been writing rural romance and sort of what we call contemporary women's fiction. And then my last book, or not my last one, but the one before.
Previous one,
the rom-com. I've sort of written my first rom-com, which came out earlier last year. And so now, I've just, they're all in the same sort of realm. Haven't written, something like sci-fi yet. No, I would never write sci-fi fan.
No.
But is that the kind of intro you want?
Absolutely. I was going to say, for our international and national listeners, you're West Australian, yeah.
Yes, I am. Live in Perth, the Swan River, with a crazy dog, a couple of cats. I have 3 not really teenage anymore, teenager and 2 adult children.
Yes. You don't look old enough.
I started young.
Okay. All right. I'll take your word for that. So as you mentioned, this is your second foray into the rom-com genre per se, but they do form a kind of a couple. You don't have to be familiar with the first one, and that's the other Bridget, isn't it, we're talking about?
The other Bridget came first. I didn't even really know that I was writing a rom-com, even though, like you, I have, been watching rom-coms for years.
Yes.
But I just thought I was sort of writing another romance, but it was not set in a rural community. It was set in Freo. In a library where we are too.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I submitted it to my publisher, they're like, "Oh, it's a rom-com." And I was a bit stressed, I must admit, because I'm thinking, what if it's not funny? But I think rom-com is quite a loose term these days.
Oh, look, absolutely. And don't think you should worry about whether it was funny or not. I chuckled out loud at some of the lines in the book. I just think the writing is so good. It's so slick. It's so sort of, the voicings, everything to me felt really right. Having been an avid watcher of rom-coms. Yes.
And I think that's one of the key things which I've really tried to remind myself and get back in the last few years of my writing is to have fun myself.
I think that comes across, and if you're having fun, the reader's bound to have fun, aren't they?
Exactly. Or, obviously that's in a rom-com type book. Other books, if you're interested in it, like you have to be as a writer almost obsessed with your idea in your book, even if you don't necessarily think it's very good, because we all have doubt and stuff, but you need to, I think that's what I had before I got published all those years. It was when I was writing, it was my hobby. So I just was excited to sneak away to it. I couldn't wait to get back to the keyboard. And then when you become a paid, like it becomes your job, it can take, and no one loves their job all the time, right? Well, even if it's a great job.
Absolutely.
It can take the some of the joy out of it. And so I've really worked hard in the last few years to go, why do I do this? And that is because I love story, I love writing and that. And so I should try and, have fun with it as much as I can, and then hopefully that comes across as well.
It does, and that's more within your power, isn't it? As I guess, essentially you're a freelancer. Yeah. You're not bound to anyone in particular, no employer. It's up to you whether you want to have fun or not.
That's true, and like I think I've talked to a few writers. No one's actually forcing you to write a book.
Exactly.
Right? And also, I thought you were actually going down the path of this. The writing is the only thing that's in an author's control, really. You can't control what happens when
afterwards, once it's out there in the world.
Whether someone likes it or don't, whether it sells well or it doesn't, whether the publisher puts, the effort that you think they should into it. What happens on the world when your book comes out, or who else comes out the same day. Like my book was supposed to come out this week. It's not coming out till next week. I don't know when this will air, but they moved it because Rebecca Yarros of Fourth Wing Success, as her third book came out this week.
Oh, right. Okay.
Literally every bookshop was having midnight, openings and the media. So they moved that. So you can't control those sort of things as an author. You can only control the book.
Okay, look, why don't we get stuck into the book for a little while? And I think we agreed that if I just read the blurb on the back, that'll give people a good overview without actually spoiling anything. And
doing an elevator pitch because I suck at those.
And it'll be better than me raking through my memory, even though I finished it only last night, trying to recall the plot.
I'm the same. Trying to explain it's hard.
I know, absolutely. Okay, so in serial data, Winifred Darling, Fred, is asked to be the maid of honour at her mother's 6th wedding. She's determined to do everything she can to stop it. As the author of a forthcoming book called 21 Rules for Not Catching Feelings, she knows about the perils of falling in love. On arrival at the island wedding destination, Fred discovers that the groom's hot muso son, Leo, is just as set against the wedding as she is. Together, they hatch a plan to stop their parents from making what they believe will be a catastrophic mistake. But as Fred and Leo's unexpected feelings for each other grow, Fred is forced to rethink her own rigid rules about romance and family. Maybe some relationships don't have to play by the book, and Fred might just become the star in a rom-com of her own. So there you go. Now, as we were saying before we started recording, there's a certain inevitability about rom-com plots, and this sort of feels that way as well.
I think that's the thing about romance, isn't it? Or crime even,
Any kind of classic genre, there are expectations from the reader that you really have to honour, don't you, in that respect?
So, you kind of know from the blurb that Fred and Leo are probably going to get together in the end, but it's the journey they go on, how they get there. And I think a lot with romance, it's also, I saw an author who's a really big romance author in the US. I can't remember the name, but I've got a little quote on my wall, and it says that writing, or I think it's any sort of book, it's like a therapy for your characters. So what do they need therapy for? And I thought that was really kind of useful to know. And so it's the journey you go on, what the characters are going through, why this person that they've met is suddenly, the one, but also why they can't be. So there's a whole load of conventions that I guess you have to play with I was actually just reading a book about writing crime, and it was said, playing with the conventions is not original, and you're not going to make an original unique story, because people come to certain genres for specific things. Exactly. And if you don't give them that, they won't be happy. If you disappoint them,
that's right. They won't come back. Give the customer what they want.
Exactly.
But as you also mentioned, there is plenty of room to play with those conventions.
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? Yeah. You have to make it's a voice, the voice of yourself, the voice as an author, which provides a difference between somebody else that's writing a very similar story. And of course in romance, you've got all these tropes like, friends to lovers, enemies to lovers, secret baby and all. But it's the way you do that makes it fresh. And I think the way is the characters are the first step, because if they're unique, and no one person in the world is the same. So it's not that hard to make characters that are, unique and different. And then you get in their head and you think, well, how would they react in this romance? Yeah. You're not writing a romance, you're writing their story, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think it's also about, I'm learning specificity. I can't even say it. Specificity. Yeah, like the little details are what make a book stand out, from another one that's got a similar plot. But, even in general fiction, there's not really more than a handful of stories really that it depends on who you listen to, whether there's
like the classic, like the hero journey, blah, 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 all these different types.
Sometimes to talk yourself out of writing a story because it's been done before. Yeah. And I think when you are writing a genre fiction like romance, you it's even harder, and it can be easier to say, well, that's been done before, but it's the way you do it.
Well, I like to think that you lean into that, and by doing so, you're almost providing variations on a theme.
Yeah.
And the enjoyment of that is knowing the theme. It's having, if some of your readers who know the genre so well they get that enjoyment from that knowledge because they can see your variations and it kind of, it chimes with them.
I guess a little bit, but then something else happens. I mean,
that sort of throws them off a bit, Yes.
One of the tropes that's really popular at the moment in romance fiction, rom-coms is only one bed. Don't know if you've heard.
No, I haven't.
Wasn't really a thing when I'm thinking about it. I don't think we've seen that much in rom-com TV, like movies or the old, all the 80s, 90s ones that we all love. But only one bed is basically, where two people, they're working together or whatever, they end up being put in the same hotel room and, because there's a mix-up or whatever, and then there's only one bed and you have to decide who's going to sleep on the floor or are they both going to share it, and all this crazy stuff. And, so there's only one bed scene kind of in this book, but it's how you make each of those scenes different.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually I've come across that a little bit in crime dramas, to be honest.
True.
You get the detective, the chief detective in the other one, and like male, female, and then up in the hotel rooms. I'll take the couch. You can have the bed, whatever. And
awkward.
And more often than not, they will end up together.
Exactly.
Funny story.
Yep.
Happened to me.
Oh.
With another guy.
Okay.
We're on a travel famil for those like one of those familiarizations that journalists do. And we're in Vietnam, and the hotel assigned us all rooms, but there was a bit of a mix-up. So two of us had to share a bed, basically, which I was fine with. I'm a grown-up. That's cool. But unfortunately, he had one of those sleep apnea.
That stops him.
Big machine. Like,
was that noisy?
It was noisy. This was going back a little while, so they're not as slick as they are now.
Yeah.
That's what I had the problem with. Nothing else.
Try and come on.
No, he didn't.
Only one bed situation, really. Well, yeah, but I don't.
No, you know what I mean. It was just like that's just a variation on that particular scenario.
Though, too, because so often I think in romance fiction or crime fiction or anything, it's like one of the things you don't want to do is be too contrived or coincidences in any fiction, really. If you have too many coincidences, people will start going, oh, well, that, that's cheating kind of thing.
Yeah.
And in some ways, the only one bed thing is a bit of a coincidence, but you've just proved it happens.
It actually happens. Okay, so we've got sidetracked a bit. Tell us more about this. I'm particularly interested in Fred's journey because it's as I said earlier, it's a 180-degree reversal in a way, and how you managed to navigate that because you weren't fully on board yourself.
No, it was really hard actually.
Yes.
So in the first book, as I said, you don't have to read it, but you do meet Fred in the first book.
Yeah.
And we've just been talking about rom-coms, and Bridget, who's the main character of the first book and who was I took my inspiration from Bridget Jones' Diary. She is this character who is obsessed with romance novels, loves watching rom-coms, dreams of meeting the one and getting married and having baby. Like she's just the whole package of that.
That reminds me of Catherine Morland in Northanger Abbey. I was so obsessed with Gothic fiction, and the romances.
You take bits from everywhere. But yeah, so she's like that. And then I kind of played with an opposites attract friendship, I guess.
Yeah.
So they met at work, but they became really good friends.
Yeah.
And Fred is the opposite of Bridget. She is anti-romance, doesn't want to get married ever, doesn't even want to be in a committed kind of relationship. She's happy just to, meet guys, have a bit of fun, move on to the next.
I like that euphemism, have a bit of fun. This is a PG-rated podcast, so.
She moves on to the next one, and she makes sure usually that, everyone knows where they stand. She's not using anyone. She's
exactly. It's all respectful and adult, and everyone's fine.
I think, like I mentioned before to you, I'm not really much of a planner, but so I just wanted that character to be a contrast of Bridget. But then the more I wrote about her, the more I thought, even though I write romance, and I love watching romance, and I do believe that, it's beautiful if you can find a really great romance and all that. I also believe, like I've got plenty of friends who are single and happy single, and I also believe that you don't need somebody to be complete, which is a lot of occasionally, I guess, what romance gets criticised for, that, it's not feminist because it's like.
It's just trying to sell this dream, I guess, that in some ways is unrealistic.
Yeah. And so, I didn't want to, with Fred, I wanted to show that, everyone can choose their own path, and, some people love, some people just, and I never planned on, her not to have not a sinister reason, but I never planned on I didn't really give her a reason. So that's her personality. That's what she's like.
You don't need a reason. That's the end of the story. Exactly. Yeah.
Because I wasn't planning on writing.
You don't need to justify it,
But then when I was doing the edits for the other Bridget, my publisher said, look, I see what you're trying to do with Fred with like the
Yeah.
opposites attract thing.
Yeah.
But she's a little bit prickly. She almost comes across as a little nasty occasionally. So do you reckon you could just tone her back a little bit? So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, yeah. So just put a few little, very small tweaks in that. So it didn't change anything big, but just to, I guess, soften her a little at the edges. Because, like we're always told who you hang out with, who your friends are and stuff, it's a reflection on you. And in fiction, I've been, told that multiple times. If someone ends up with someone awful or they've got a horrible friend, it makes you think differently of the main character. So my publisher said, check, fix her a little bit. So I wrote one line and it was something like Bridget had only seen Fred cry twice, once when her cat died and once when her mum got married for the 5th time. And I just thought that
what a great line. Yes, yes.
And I thought, well, if your mum had been married for the 5 times and gone through 5 divorces kind of thing and you'd grown up in that scenario, you might be a little anti-marriage as well.
Absolutely.
And once I got that idea in my head, I just thought, well, maybe I can write Fred's story. And then I think around the same time, speaking of movies, I grew up absolutely in love and watching it multiple times, The Parent Trap, the original one, with the twins who, they're not switched at birth, they're separated at birth. One goes to the parent, dad, one goes to the mum, and then they meet later and, can't plan to get their parents back together. And they also have to stop their dad marrying the young love interest. And I just thought, I loved The Parent Trap and it was such a fun, shenanigans that they got to. I thought, what if I did a grown-up version of The Parent Trap, but instead of trying to get their parents together, they're trying to separate them. So then I immediately sort of had the story that Fred's mum would be getting married for the 6th time, and I decided that the groom's son would also be unhappy about the wedding for different reasons and that they would work this out and decide that they were going to stop it going ahead. And so that once I had that story, it came very quickly, the idea. And I knew I had to write Fred's story. But I did then after, I very much think quick and don't think about the consequences before. I did tell my publisher and she loved it and it was all great. And then I kind of had a bit of a second thought about it because I thought I don't want Fred to have a complete turnaround because I don't want it to be like, oh, you need romance in your life to, exactly what I said before. So I was thinking, great, well, that's bad. I'm writing a romance novel, so I can't have them, not to get together because as we said before, that breaks the conventions. And then I got around it in my head, or I came to be okay with it by remembering that I do write romance and that there are conventions of romance, and the 2 main ones for romance is one that the main plot is a love story, and the second one is that it's got a happy ever after, or at least a happy for now. And so I thought people who are reading my book, and obviously by the cover and stuff, my readers mostly know that I write romance or I wrote general fiction, and this one was definitely in the romance. The readers who come to romance, they're expecting that. So I shouldn't be worried about,
No, not at all.
So but I did make sure she didn't do a complete 180 in terms of I don't think she will ever get married.
No, I see what you're saying. That's a fair point. Yeah.
So but it was something I had to grapple with. Every book gives its own challenge.
I mean, one thing that stands in my mind, and this is so both of us are on Substack.
Yep,
of course,
love it.
Loving it. Yeah, it's a fantastic community. I notice a lot of a lot of the women writing on Substack, a particular kind of woman, I guess it's fair to say. I'm not being sexist or anything. I think they're very intelligent, educated. They've got high expectations of their potential partners. The number one thing for them, they have to be able to read. They have to read. They have to be a reader. Books. And so you've got that in there that Fred is so taken aback by this guy who reads.
Super excited. I definitely think reading is appealing for people like me who are a writer. And read other readers,
some of these women are almost saying it's like a deal breaker. So if he's not reading, I'm not interested. He can be good looking. He can have everything else.
Rich. I've been married for over 20 years. And actually my husband did read. He still does, but audio mostly now. But I wouldn't say it's a deal breaker.
No, it's probably a bit extreme.
I would want someone who, has read a book and is maybe, reads newspapers or, it's just the type of, So, and I think there's a Instagram account. I don't know if it's still around, but it was years ago called Hot Guys Reading.
Yes, I do remember that. I thought you were going to say that. Yeah.
I used to take photos of people on trains and public transport and stuff reading and that. So, Yeah, I think it just adds an extra. It's not a deal breaker, but it adds a good extra layer.
Well, I think it sends a signal. This person is a thinking person at the very least. This person
that's true.
is deeper than just
open to to different ideas and
exactly.
not be so completely and utterly set in their ways.
Yeah,
I actually have been saying for quite a few years. This was before the book talk phenomenon.
Yeah,
where a lot of the romances that the young people were reading there are well, they even call them smut, and some of them are, so it's, just sex rather than necessarily much story.
Yeah.
Not all of them, but like some is a bit linked to it. And then there's also quite a lot of, bully romance was something that was kind of big and really dark romance where it's almost, abuse. So before that sort of became more of a thing though, I was always saying, I reckon teenage boys should be reading romance novels. Like we should put what women want, but also, and I'm not talking about the sex scenes.
No. It's a whole relationship. Exactly.
So I do think men who read, and if they read romance as well, even not all the time, they're ahead of the game.
Yeah. Oops. Well, I better make sure this is not the last one I read then. Some of the ideas you talked about romance in general, about some people need to feel that. They need to have that big romance to feel complete as a person and that you can't feel. I mean, I don't think that's true, but I think there's a certain part of you that if you do have that huge, big romance in your life, that may be the only one. And even if that doesn't last, that's always going to be a part of you and it's going to shape you and be, so I think it's always there. So to that respect, it is actually an essential part of you, isn't it?
I think for the majority of people, I would say so. I mean, years and years ago, I did an interview for the West, I think, with a number of other authors. And one of them said something about, like, the question was, why do people like romance?
Yes.
And one of them said something, well, everyone in the world is either in a relationship and it's a happy kind of one, or they're in a relationship and it's a bad one, and they'd probably actually like to be in a better one. Or they're jealous of someone else's partner who seems to,
or they're not in one at all, but they want one.
But they want one.
Yeah.
There's very few people who are completely 100% happy without that emotional intimacy as well. And I think I know a couple of them, and it's fine. And sometimes I think it would be nice.
And have you found that it is genuinely by choice, or just that they really haven't found the right person that they click with?
It's probably they haven't found the right person. I think, most people, like saying that, I think there's probably very few people out there, even if you're anti, romance and love like Fred, if something comes along and you've got this, amazing connection with people on a number of different levels, there really, I guess there really isn't anything better than having someone who absolutely, is there for you, understands you, is your friend, So I do think that's why people, like romance.
Oh, well, there's absolutely nothing like it, And I think we also have to
get when you've just fallen in love or something.
Totally.
And I think so. We may, as you said, you may only have that once in your life, but then being able to read about it is also like you kind of remember, or it's
exactly having those memories, and as I say, really so embedded in you and your psyche that it is genuinely a part of you. Do you think it's worth recognizing that it's almost the perfect relationship is actually quite rare, and most 100%. Of us will have to compromise at the end of the day, which is fine.
Which is interesting because, like, I think that's why a lot of people that read romance, they want they want to read. They always want more. Like they want the sequel to say the story.
Yes.
I forgot who said it, but if we write a sequel, like say if I write a sequel about Fred and Leo or Bridget and Sully for the first book, it's either going to be very boring if they're living the perfect, happy life and they do have that amazing relationship where they don't have, or if they have to work through it, like, it's going to be quite boring as well. You don't really, for this type of book, that's not what they want. They want, when the readers are asking for a sequel, they just want to know if they got married and had babies, really. No one actually thinks beyond actually, this is something I haven't announced anywhere yet, but it doesn't matter because it's, I'm allowed to.
Yeah, you're sure.
My book, The Patterson Girls, which was my first women gender fiction, but it had 4 romances in it. Like, they were part of it. And it's 10 years next year. This year, sorry, 10 years this year since it came out. And my publishers decided to do a 10-year anniversary edition. And they asked if I wanted to do a bonus epilogue. And I said yes immediately, because so many people have wanted a sequel for that book, but I never really wanted to do the whole of what their life is kind of like afterwards. But I've just done like 5 to 7K, I think, of 10 years later. And it was, I showed the hints that it's not always perfect, like the 2 people that were in that book who seemed magic, they've now got 3 kids and a toddler who doesn't sleep, and they're snapping at each other all the time.
Yeah,
And,
of course.
Another one that are working too hard, and so yeah, I think that's sort of that post-romance thing, but the romance genre doesn't really specifically deal with it unless you're writing a second chance.
And I guess that's where genuine friendship and companionship kicks in.
Yes.
And I think that's something that any good relationship
has to have.
I think should have at the beginning.
Yeah.
Before you take it to that.
You're probably not going to, it's not going to
You're not going to last. Yeah. Once that initial, as you say, rush of being in love.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think for most people, that actual completely obsessed, initial stage, it's got to fade a little bit.
Okay. For listeners, this is the sealed adult section now. Going to take us some interesting territory here.
Have to stop listening if that.
It goes back to what you were talking about. Actually, it prompted me to talk about this. You're talking about boys should read more romance and how to treat women and how to respect women. Let's say at the time of this podcast coming out, Baby Girl will have hit our screens.
Yes.
Okay. This is an example.
Mm-hmm.
There's lots of books out there about this, and I want to say this: the orgasm gap.
Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Serious issue, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is about educating young men.
Exactly. That's one of the reasons I think, well, I mean, as I said, it's not just the sexual part, but a well-written sex scene that, explores everyone's pleasure.
Mutual pleasure. Exactly.
It might put some seeds of ideas into, boys' heads and stuff.
I would like to think so.
Watching the porn that, is so prevalent.
Totally.
I don't know if we'll ever get teenage boy unless we might if we put it on the year 12, year 11 curriculum. They might be right.
Hint. Yeah.
But I do think, and as I said, you've got to be careful about which book it is because there's, some that like I know women that like reading, some quite dark romance and stuff, but they don't necessarily want that in their life. That's like their it's a fantasy to read it, but they don't necessarily want it. So you don't want boys necessarily reading that, young boys, because they'll
100%.
All the women want us to be treating them like but, that's an old book now. That's why I use that rather than some of the new ones.
Yeah, of course.
But yeah, so it's a fine line. But I do think that's one of the other things. Like, well, romance is often accused. I hear people say it gives women unrealistic expectations. And
but they shouldn't be unrealistic.
Exactly.
This is the whole point.
That's what I think. Like, and I've seen, the people that say that are usually, I really, there's a lot of, I think there's so many good men in the world. I've got, not saying, but I love it when I see good men in books, but the ones that usually say that online are not those kind of men. And they're usually probably thinking, well, I shouldn't have to, do all this, and make, so like, I don't think romance novels give women or men unrealistic expectations of love. I think it shows that don't settle for second best, don't settle for someone who's not going to treat you with respect and share your dreams and support you. It should work both ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. It should be, as you say, a mutually well, basically what you're saying is it should be an equal relationship. It's pure and simple.
Exactly. That's what I mean. So I think it's not unrealistic for women or men to expect the type of relationship that a lot of romance novels portray.
Yeah. I'm glad that, I assumed you would be thinking about all that. And I think that's what lifts a lot of even this kind of genre to a more intelligent, more engaged level, because you are dealing with legitimate issues just in a fun way.
Yeah, exactly. I think obviously there's a whole load of spectrum of fiction out there in every single genre, but I feel like one of the misconceptions of romance fiction particularly, and even like women's fiction, we call it, is that just because it's easy to read, light and fluffy, you don't necessarily need a dictionary to people think, oh, well, it can't be important and meaningful as well. And like all the best romance novels I read, and hopefully the ones I write, most of them, this is probably the lightest actually, but most of them do explore some serious issues. I never start with that, but it's just life. They're it's a bit also, I guess, in the characters, when that whole going back to original characters, well, everyone has stuff going on in their lives, and so those serious issues can often can be raised. I've also explored things in my books that I have changed my opinion on. I try not to put an opinion in my book, but I think that's the magic of reading as well, commercial and general fiction. You can actually access a whole load more people than some genres or some
100%.
And so you can explore serious issues.
And I think the crime genre is particularly good at that. They've always explored serious societal issues.
And they feel like that's compelling and they stay up until 3 a.m., so you're not feeling like you're getting a lecture or you're reading a non-fiction book, because some people don't want that. I'm not saying there's any, I love, that's all great. Non-fiction books are great and these things too, but not everyone's going to read them. So I think genre fiction can make certain issues accessible to people. Yeah.
100% agree. So I look, to finish with, I always love to ask people what they're reading, what they're enjoying, and in fact what they're watching too.
Yeah.
If you're watching something.
I don't watch enough TV, unfortunately, but I did recently watch the series The Road Trip by Beth O'Leary. It's a rom-com book that I loved a few years ago and it just came out, so I was like, I have to watch that.
Yeah.
So that was really good.
Yeah.
And I've been loving Claire Lombardo. I've read 2 Claire Lombardo books in the last month. She's an American writer who writes like very big books, but they're like relationship stories over decades. People have been married for 40 years and they're the highs and lows of it's just really gripping. Even though I'm loving what's called I was calling them quiet novels.
Okay.
Where the plot is not necessarily
the main show.
Not worried about people being attacked by monsters or whatever. But an agent recently told me that they're called plotless novels, which sounds weird, a novel without a plot, but it's like
not if you're reading literary fiction.
Exactly. And I guess this is like contemporary, genre fiction's equivalent to literary, it's a fine line, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
They're really much more, it's about the interiority of the characters and their lives and stuff. And
that's enormously satisfying, isn't it? You don't really need an action,
because I'm so nosy and I like being.
Oh, I see. That's what it's all about. Yes. Well, that's why you're a writer.
Yeah.
Everything is grist for the mill.
Exactly.
Just don't tell them.
No.
You're going to be in my next book.
Yeah. Some people like it. I know. I had a journalist for years ask me, have you ever put anyone in a book? And I'm like, no, actually, I have not ever specifically, little things but no, I've never taken like one person I've known and put them in a book with their whole personality and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of people, when we had a shop in the country, they would come in, when are you going to write a book about me? And like, I'll happy, so most people are happy to be put, they think until you put them in.
Until you actually put. Well, you probably know Michael Robotham loves using people's names. So if he meets someone, he just uses their name.
The thing is, it's hard to come up with names once you've written as many books as like Michael Robotham. Like, it's just.
That is so true. So why wouldn't you grab someone's name if you hear a name,
I've started collecting, when you do book signings and they put the publicist or whatever uses Post-it notes to.
Right.
I have started sometimes collecting the pile of Post-it notes.
Oh, wow.
So that I can flick through the names, because otherwise I often look at a bookshelf and I'm thinking, okay, I'll put Judy with Levitt, whatever. But yeah, it's hard when you've written quite a few books and you have to check they haven't used before, and even like smaller like secondary characters and all that kind of stuff. So,
and this is a lot of it's very indicative of the kinds of things that most readers probably don't even think about that you're doing.
No.
That you're having to worry about.
No, it's a job.
But you're very fortunate. Well, look, thank you so much, Rachael, for being on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Right back at you. I loved it.
And so you've started a podcast of your own with a fellow author. Do you want to let people know where they can find that?
I'm doing with a fellow WA author, Anthea Hodson.
Who's amazing, of course.
Yes. And it's called Reading Between Deadlines. So you can find us on all the, the podcast.
The usual suspects, yes.
What we're doing is once a month we're unpacking, a book that's really been hyped and everyone in the world seems to be reading it. We're doing overseas books for this because we know most of the readers, we don't know all the writers, Australia, but, we don't want to unpack or be judgmental of a fellow author's book. In Australia.
Of course. You can,
if someone
safe
sold
grounds.
millions of copies, then they don't need to worry.
No.
So we're kind of, seeing why we think it was so, successful and whether we like it or not. And then the other episode each month we interview. We've got an online book club, so we're interviewing the author of the book.
Oh, so, that's beautiful. Yeah.
It's been fun so far. We've only had one episode out, but we're loving it.
And I just remember that Anthea's got a broadcasting background, so she's perfect.
So she is very good.
Yeah. Fantastic.
She knows how to, come up with questions for people as well, so that's great.
Okay, Rach, well, I'll let you get back to the air-conditioned comfort of your car.
Thank you.
This office is just really bad at the moment.
It's not the
Thank
best.
you again. You take care and have a great day.
You too. Bye.